Good afternoon to everybody. Thanks for the time taken to attend this webinar on PCI DSS and other related updates for all the PCI standards. My name is Afi Merchant. I'm a senior VP with ControlCase, and I kind of head the business operations for strategic initiatives, as well as business development and technical sales engineering for ControlCase. I really appreciate the time taken to attend this webinar on PCI DSS and related changes. What we are going to do is just go through a set of agenda, mainly talk on ControlCase on a higher level, PCI DSS version 4, what's upcoming as version 4, and what are the changes from a 3.2 perspective, a little update on PADSS and SSF, the PADSS standard for payment application, which is going to be sunsetting in the near future, and SSF, which is just about rolled out, and there are assessors who are trained and organizations who are accredited to do SSF, which is secure software standard, as well as secure software lifecycle standard, and assessors have to be accredited to essentially do that. Number 4, we are going to talk about the P2P changes, what's PCI PIN, 3DS, card production, so on and so forth, and the time frame for these various standards to go live / sunset, and how it's going to be effective in the future. And finally, we would have a question and answer session where I could essentially answer to any questions. So at any point in time, if there are questions, kindly put down in the questions window, and as I mentioned, I will respond to it in the order which was received. ControlCase. We are solely and very focused into IT certifications and continuous compliance services. We have about 1,000 plus clients. We have been in the business for 14 plus years now, more than 1,000 plus clients across the globe. We have delivered more than 10,000 plus IT security certifications, mainly PCI, but a whole lot more as well. And then we have about 250 plus security experts whom we hire as employees, who are essentially assessors, developers, cybersecurity, security experts with us. So 2 main themes where we essentially provide services. It's IT certification services and continuous compliance. So let's talk about the first one, which is IT certification services. Today, day and age, if you look at any organization, whether it is Fortune 100 or any organizations who are essentially providing certain services to clients, they use the infrastructure, the digital age, and most of them, because of the data which is being handled by these organizations, or all of our organizations to say, you have to abide by certain certification standards. Whether it is PCI, whether it's ISO, whether it's high trust for healthcare, whether it's GDPR in Europe or CCPA in California. A lot of these certifications or compliance need, either by law or because of the marketing need, or just to keep the data secured, keep these data attributes secured. There are a lot of these compliance and certification needs. And our whole goal is to solely provide services related to compliance, related to certification, related to continuous compliance, because as you know, certification is just a point in time. Once you essentially attain it, you have to continuously maintain and retain it to get certified or compliant annually, year after year, or maybe in a 2-year cycle, whatever the case might be for a particular certification. So our team or our service is all around IT certifications to let you achieve that IT certification, and following that, do a continuous compliance services where you can continuously maintain it going in the future and get certified or be compliant on a year-on-year basis and stay compliant. Now, how do we deliver this? Um, we come in as your trusted journey partners for your compliance services need. So we consider ourselves as partners and have a partnership approach rather than a checklist auditor, which would come in and assess and probably pass or maybe fail. But we come in as a partnership approach to kind of guide you through and go through the whole process and get you certified. We have a phases called readiness phase and so on and so forth. Now, how do we deliver this? Through our technology platform called SkyCam. And over a period of the past 14 years, we have built this technology platform, SkyCam, as robust and as ease of use for assisting customers to get compliant to different certifications. It has a lot of automation built in. It has a lot of dashboard and views for management to kind of keep track and a reality check on how the compliance looks, in a single screen with different graphical areas to say, hey, they are so much percentage compliant with PCI as of today, so much with GDPR, so much with ISO if they are doing multiple different certifications. So that's certification and continuous compliance. Those are the flagship services which we provide to our client. Now, as I was talking about multiple certification, a good place to get into is what we call it as one audit. One audit, essentially what it means is assess once and comply to many. So we are accredited to do ISO certifications, ISO 27001, 27002. We do SOC attestation, SOC 1, 2, 3 attestation, SOC for cybersecurity. We are accredited by High Trust Alliance to do high trust certifications. Of course, PCI DSS, what we are going to talk about in much more detail. So we are qualified security assessor company, and we do PCI DSS along with many other PCI standards, because we have assessors who are QPAs, which are needed for PCI PIN. We have assessors specifically for card production. So we have assessors for SSF, SSLC, so many different assessors within our team who can perform with a lot of these different PCI standards. Now, what we have done and over a period of the past 14 years learned and put all together is the one audit where we can assess once and comply to many. I will give with a very short example. If you have to take PCI DSS requirement 5 and ISO requirement for antivirus, anti-malware, it's kind of same with some common denominator of controls. Maybe certain controls are little stringent in a particular standard, or maybe little lenient in a particular standard. But essentially, it's a control related to antivirus and anti-malware. If we are doing PCI and ISO, both for your organization, we could collect evidence for the common controls, as in the antivirus policy, certain configuration, screenshots, so on and so forth. Assess it once using our assessor capabilities, but then it will help as evidences for both the PCI DSS and ISO. What it essentially does, it of course reduces your audit fatigue. It reduces your cost, so it becomes more cost effective, less resource intensive, and audit fatigue, the biggest thing, right? So you don't have to provide the same evidence to different vendors at different points in time, but you could kind of all bring together within your audit calendar, and we could perform as a one audit, which is assess only and comply to many. One of our so-called services, which is really appreciated by many clients in the SMB or mid-market enterprises. Okay, let's talk about the PCI DSS standards at a glance. PCI DSS, payment card industry data security standard, where it essentially all started. It is all related to security of environments that store, process, or transmit the account data or card data. Nowadays, there are many different channels how this happens, whether it's e-commerce, card present, card not present, but you bring into all of that environment, that infrastructure, those business processes, where you either store, process, or transmit card data, and you run it by the PCI DSS standards, which is essentially 12 requirements and about 270 different controls within those 12 requirements. PCI PIN, it's explicitly for payment applications that support PCI DSS compliance. So mainly meant for organizations which provide or which kind of develop software used by other organizations, sold off the shelf with configuration, but it's part of the authorization transaction of a payment transaction. So it's part of the authorization cycle of a payment transaction. PCI P2P, it's related to, as it sounds, point-to-point encryption. It ensures the data is encrypted at the point of sale device and can be decrypted by the dedicated solution. It's mainly used as part of encryption environment, key injection facilities, decryption environment. PCI TSP, requirements for token service providers for EMV payment tokens. So that's very specific to service providers who provide token services for different clientele. PCI card production standard, which is related to physical and logical security requirements for card manufacturing. So that essentially includes issuing banks or financial institutions or somebody who's essentially doing processes such as data manipulation, card personalization, card embossing, so on and so forth. Mainly the standard is used by issuing banks or service providers assisting issuing banks to emboss and have the new card in play. PCI 3DS, it's physical and logical requirements for entities that implement 3DS payment solutions. PCI PTS HSM is all related to the physical and logical controls for securing your HSM. PCI PTS POI, which is protection of sensitive data at POI, so point of interface data, point of sale devices. And PIN security is related to secure management, processing, and transmission of PIN data. So when you're using your credit card or debit card at ATM and entering your 4-digit or your 6-digit PIN, it's all about securing that PIN block of data to be used during the transmission of that card information. All right. Now, as we get into the next step, I would like to make an important disclosure out here since we start to begin on the PCI DSS version 4. What I'm going to state going forward is basically going to be the ControlCase opinion on the new PCI DSS version 4 standards and other related standards. This is how we read into the standard and how we kind of assess it and how we are going to take it forward. It's definitely not representing any position on the PCI SSC Council and the way they have written the standards. There's still feedback going on the PCI DSS 4.0, and an early draft of the standard will maybe change over the next few months before it is released. It's supposedly to be released by late 2020, but recently with all the COVID pandemic things, it might be delayed or it might stay on track, but it's supposed to be somewhere around Q4 of 2020 when the standard would be released. For all authoritative information from the Council on PCI DSS 4.0, please visit the PCI SSC website. We have provided the links within our slides, so you can directly click from here and go to those discussions related to PCI DSS version 4. So again, just to make sure and clear, it's our opinion on the standard, not an authoritative position as by the PCI SSC. And for any such information, you could visit their website. Most of our slides going forward and what we will be discussing are having these links available on the slides itself. So you can go directly to the PCI standards org and look at that standard and what essentially those documents, they have a whole big document library which kind of discusses and provides feedback on these standards. Okay. So what are the goals for the proposed updates for PCI DSS version 4.0? The key priorities for PCI DSS version 4 are still security and flexibility, right? So now as we see, a lot of payment channels have changed, right? Now there's in the marketplace, the new ones are, mobile organizations or telecom companies have mobile wallets. You have Apple Pay, you have tap and go for cards, so contactless, card transactions have also come into play these days. So there are lots of these new technologies which come into play. And with this increasing amount of payment channels, the way payment transactions happen, there's evolving risk and threats to the payment data. So the PCI DSS 4.0 still talks about security and flexibility. Reinforcing security as a continuous process is what PCI DSS version 4.0 is about. It supports the use of different security technologies that meet the PCI DSS requirements. So these are the main three areas, and you see there's a link out there directly to the PCI security standards.org, which provides further information on all of these three different aspects. As I mentioned earlier, not anticipated until late 2020 at the earliest. So I'm assuming it would be somewhere in Q4 when the PCI DSS version 4.0 will be released, because that's what was stated during the beginning of the year. Don't know whether it's going to be delayed for any particular reason or it's still going to be at Q4 2020. The traditional methods which are used for validating PCI DSS are not going away. So we are going to stick to the essential traditional methods of how we do the validation for PCI DSS version, right? So there's guidance, there's validation testing, it all stays the same. The new approach for version 4, which allows an assessor to provide information, is around validation approach that identifies the security option. So an assessor essentially could shy away from what the validation approach is stated as a guidance from the council, but it could have its own customized validation. But that customized validation has to be documented, one, and two, it has to illustrate that the initial control objective, which was stated over there, it meets the intent and goes above and beyond that particular intent of the control objective. So you don't have to provide, unlike the compensating controls which were used, you don't have to have a business or a technical justification for not meeting the requirements and using alternative methods. You could essentially have a customized validation done, but you have to document that in your report of compliance. How are you going through a customized validation of that particular control to make sure that you meet the intent and go above and beyond that intent of that control objective and the assessor and the team can provide that information and then say, okay, now the control is in place after having the customized validation assessed and, of course, found compliant. More discussions on the securitystandards.org website about PCI DSS version 4 right through with a click-through link on our slide. Okay, let's talk about the PADSS. So Payment Application Data Security Standard. This was meant for software organizations which are essentially putting software in the marketplace to be bought off the shelf and used as part of a payment transaction authorization. So all those software companies had to get their application to PADSS certified. Well, things have changed quite a bit. Nowadays, it's more about the cloud environment, software as a service, from a cost perspective. So it is more of having different smaller organizations who are providing software as a service as well, right? So with that evolving change in technology and way services are provided, there are two standards which have come into play. One is a secure software standard, which is very similar to the PADSS, essentially looking to see how your application, whether it's software as a service or whether that software is essentially abiding by all the controls from securing the software itself, right? So whether the coding has been done right, whether application pen test has been done, does it have logging, monitoring, does it have logging enabled, how you can enable it, how you can capture, what are you capturing, so on and so forth. So it looks at securing the software itself. And then the second part over here, which is kind of a little new, is what kind of secure software lifecycle or secure SLC standard come into play. That essentially is looking at your SDLC and saying, are you doing the right things in terms of version control? How you put that versions out in the marketplace? How's your whole process of testing, change management, and so on and so forth. So an SLC is a little different than an SSF standard, whereas SLC, the vendor itself, the software organization, can get certified with the Secure Software Lifecycle Standard, and the Secure Software Standard is essentially meant for the application. So intent of the standard is, as I mentioned, intent of the standard is similar to PADSS. The program was launched in the recent past in Q4 of 2019. There are a few organizations that during Q2 of this year, I believe after April this year was when PCI SSC opened up for training related to SSF and SLC. There are few organizations who have registered and have passed the SSF and the SLC exams as well, so they have assessors listed. All current PADSS listings will be valid through the expiry, which is up until 2022, and submissions of new PADSS will end by end of 2020. So after that, the SSF and the Secure SLC standard will come into effect. Okay. About software secure lifecycle standard. As I mentioned, this is a certification which is provided to the actual software vendors, demonstrating the mature secure lifecycle. So you use your secure lifecycle, demonstrate the capabilities and your maturity into that, you get SLC certified, and you have that same particular software SDLC lifecycle used for developing your software, and your software, your application will be validated through the secure software standard. So two standards kind of work hand in hand, essentially. So a little different from what it was earlier as a PCI DSS, but two different standards now, which work hand in hand, and it's the secure software standard and the secure software lifecycle, as secure SLC standard. Okay. Let's talk about the point-to-point encryption. That's the current version of P2P is version 2. P2P version 3 was published in December 2019, so not as far away. In the recent patch, it was published. Changes to the security requirements or changes to the standard itself is very minor. There are more of a program changes in version 5. So any merchants who are considering a P2P solution should go ahead and essentially conduct it, whether it is with version 2 or version 3, because it provides the same level of confidence and same level of security. The standard itself has not changed. What's changed in the standard? Again, there's a link which gives you all the details about it, but I'm going to briefly put it out there. The way the P2P solutions were listed on the PCI website today as part of version 2, it's significantly changed how it will be listed as part of version 3. So version 3, it's going to be, you could do component listing. So you could essentially have different components like encryption management services, decryption management services, key management and injection services. So you could essentially list as separate service what you provide if you're a service provider. So it could be partly stated that you are a key management and injection facility, and you are going to have a P2P solution, which is mainly delivered from a key management and injection services. So that's the main difference. As far as I mentioned, no real security level updates between version 3 and version 4. The link below provides all the details on version 3. So you could visit the website to the PCI Security Standards website to get more information on P2P version 3. Okay, let's talk about PCI PIN, another standard. It's the current version is version 3.0. It applies to the online and offline payment card transactions at ATM. Again, both attended or unattended point of sale devices, assist retail electronic payment system participants in establishing assurance that cardholder PINs will not be compromised. And basically, the standard is all about security controls associated with secure management, processing, and transmission of personal or PIN data at POS terminals, right? So it's about the 4-digit/6-digit PIN data, which you essentially punch in after you want to do a debit card transaction at a POS device. How that particular PIN block, how is it encrypted, and how it is decrypted at your acquiring bank or authorization payment gateway or payment service providers. How that transmission of that information is encrypted and decrypted, and how the PIN data comes into play. 3DS standard overview. This is essentially the current version, which is version 1. It essentially brings into picture the 3DS, or what we call it as a 3DE environment. The control objectives are transaction process operations, symmetric key distribution using asymmetric techniques, key injection facilities, and minimum key sizes and encryption algorithms. So those are all for the PCI PIN. Now, on the PCI 3DS, you have the 3DE environment, which essentially consists of the 3DS server, 3DS directory server, and 3DS access control server. The current version for PCI 3DS is at version 1.0. It applies to environments where ACS, DS, or 3DS functions are performed. Typically, a 3DS environment which contains system components involved in performing or facilitating 3DS transactions, as well as system components supporting the 3D. So mainly used as a messaging protocol for customers to authenticate the card information with the actual issuing bank. So nowadays, lots of issuing banks have the OTP setup or a specific kind of authorization code or card grid, anything similar to that. It has to abide by the 3DS PCI 3DS standard. Let's talk about the PCI card production. The card production has to be done by a CSPA, which is a card production security assessor. It essentially is to train security professionals to perform assessment where the card production and provisioning logical security requirements and also provisioning physical security requirements. A card production entity essentially performs the card production and provisioning. It does data preparation, card embossing, pre-personalization, manufacturing of card data, chip embedding, and not to forget the PIN generation and PIN mailers and card carriers. So, and service provider, which does this on behalf of an issuing bank or maybe even the issuing bank, essentially has to go through a particular standard to say how the card production unit abides, where essentially the physical cards have been printed, embossed, and shipped across to customers. So you mainly look at the logical and the physical controls when it comes to the card production overview. Okay. So the last area where we kind of talk about 2019 and going up in the future, what's happening today, where is the PCI security standards going to head towards? P2P version 3 was published, as I mentioned, in the recent past in December 2019. Main areas are areas of how the listing is going to happen for P2P solutions on the PCI Security Standards website, where you are going to have these component listings available. PCI Software Security Framework program was launched in late 2019. The standard is available on the PCI DSS website. There are two different standards, Secure Software Standard and Secure Software Lifecycle, SSF and SLC standard. PADSS submission will be accepted up until 2020, and the PADSS listings will expire in 2022. PCI DSS version 4 is anticipated in late 2020 or maybe early 2021. But right now it seems to be on track, and you should get the version 4 come in late 2020. The software security, one last thing which probably is kind of missed in this timeline is the software security life cycle or the software security framework standard is launched. There are companies which are currently accredited to those to essentially do those assessments from a software security framework perspective, inclusive of SLC. ControlCase is also listed as part of accredited by the PCI Council to do that. So that's related to the timeline of the recent past up until the near future, how PCI DSS or PCI Security Standards Council also has been evolving with evolving payment channels, evolving threats, and evolving risk in payment channels. How the standards have gone from what they were way back in the past. With every new version, it's trying to still give flexibility, but as well as maintain security related to every aspect related to the payment channels. Well, with that, I would thank you for your time to attend this particular webinar on PCI DSS and related changes. Give you guys a moment, and if you have any further questions on any topic, maybe it is PCI, maybe something else, I would try my best to answer it, and I'll respond to questions in the order it has been received. All right. So I have one of the questions. This is not related to PCI. It's about the CMMI level certifications, whether we have in our roadmap to perform such of those certifications. As of right now, we do not have any specific roadmap where we have CMMI. Of course, we have a roadmap where we are building and putting in new IT certifications. In the recent past, we have been accredited to do FedRAMP certifications, which is mainly for the federal government or essentially service providers providing services to federal government. So we have been recently accredited to do that. And we have also been accredited and we have been doing switch certifications for our clientele. Okay, so this is related to methodology. Will the changes of PCI DSS in version 4.0 change the 96 questions in the audit? Yes, I believe we are putting it together currently. It might increase the questions by either one or two questions where we are looking to map the 4.0 and those requirements with question set as a part of our methodology and approach, which is ControlCase proprietary. Another question is, compensating controls still be acceptable in PCI DSS version 4? That is true. Yes, it will be accepted in version 4, but you could have customized validation, so you don't have to follow the validation of the actual control objective. You could have your own validation technique, but you have to document those details of how you validate it, and then it has to go, as I mentioned, above and beyond the essential intent of the control objective, what it does. Do we, as an organization, have mapping of various controls available for the client? Yes, we do. It's proprietary intellectual property of ControlCase. So we have mapped across, maybe across like 8 or 10 different regulations, standards, into a simple questionnaire format. We do have it, and it is based. We use that. Our assessors essentially use that mainly to perform assessments for our clients who are doing multiple audits or assessments with us. Do we have any update on work from home? Yes, if you go on our website, you would find certain data sheets, very, very relevant data sheets when it comes to a PCI DSS standard for a work from home. If you could send out an email to contact@controlcase.com, probably one of our representatives will provide you with those data sheets, or essentially the white paper, which can also be found on our website. There's a question, a very interesting question related to one audit and evidences accepted across those audits. Again, as I had mentioned earlier, the way we perform one audit is using intellectual property, which is where we have mapped different control objectives, mainly the common denominator controls, the common set of controls into a single or maybe few questions. Using those few questions, there are evidences which are collected, and we use those evidences to essentially perform the assessment or go through the audit process. So it's a 10-step approach which we do going to do a one audit. Assess once, of course. Let me put it again as a disclaimer, as a common understanding that the scope has to be constant across those multiple different certifications, so we can perform one audit and in totality. Let me see if I've missed out on any questions in here. Okay, so there's one standard which is related to PCI P2P and other PCI standards seems to have an overlap with PCI DSS requirements. Is it really an overlap? Meaning, if we get a PCI DSS certification, would we automatically get PCI P2P certified? No, when it comes to PCI DSS, that certification is mainly meant and only meant for software organizations developing software. So it is very, very specific to software organizations which develop software, and that particular software is part of a payment transaction and part of an authorization cycle. And P2P is significantly different, which talks about point-to-point encryption between the POI and your acquiring bank, right? So a different way of looking at things. So it does have some common elements. I believe not P2P and PCI DSS, but certainly P2P and PCI DSS standard, common elements, but it has different security control objectives, which has to be taken separately. So in other words, all of the PCI DSS standards have something unique, something specific for a particular type of service provider. So you choose what standard you need to do depending on your services which you're providing to your client or your client's requirements. But it does have mapping back to different other standards such as ISO, healthcare, and so on and so forth. Well, at this point, I would thank everybody to have joined this particular webinar and spent your precious time of the day. And again, the webinar slides as well as the recording will be available at www.controlcase.com. So you could definitely go back and refer to it in the future. Also, to register for new future webinars on PCI, on IT certification, kindly visit www.controlcase.com/webinars, and you can register for many different webinars. Again, I would like to thank everyone for joining me for this particular webinar on PCI DSS and related changes. And good luck, stay safe, stay healthy. Thank you. Bye.